In the Grand Ward Estate, 22-year-old Emmeline finds her carefully planned life disrupted when she discovers that her secret European pen pal Elle is actually Malachi Peterson, the quiet stable hand who works on her father's property. As her father pushes her toward marriage with the wealthy but cold Frederick Henderson, Emmeline must choose between duty and a forbidden love that blossomed through heartfelt letters. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The spring sun warmed the sprawling Ward estate as Emmeline brushed her long brown hair by the window. At 22, she was the picture of grace and beauty, but her eyes held a restlessness that her wealthy family couldn't understand. "Another letter came for you," said Martha, the elderly housekeeper who had practically raised Emmeline after her mother's passing. Emmeline's heart skipped a beat. She quickly tucked the brush away and reached for the envelope Martha held. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please close the door on your way out." Once alone, Emmeline ran her fingers over the familiar handwriting that had become so dear to her. The letter had traveled all the way from Europe, or so she believed. For nearly a year now, these letters had been her escape from the monotony of high society life. It had all started as a silly game. Her cousin Beatrice had visited from Boston last spring, bringing with her the daring spirit of city life. "You need some excitement," Beatrice had declared one afternoon as they watched a traveling merchant pack his bags after selling exotic fabrics to Emmeline's father. "I dare you to slip a note into his bag." Emmeline had been shocked. What would I even write? Beatrice's eyes had twinkled with mischief. "Address it to a lonely European gentleman with a poetic soul. Write whatever comes to your heart." That night, Emmeline had written her first letter. She'd never imagined anyone would actually read it, let alone respond. But 3 weeks later, a reply arrived, signed simply as L. Now, almost a year later, Emmeline lived for these letters. She carefully opened the envelope and settled into the window seat, her favorite reading spot. "My dearest Emmeline," the letter began. The words that followed transported her across oceans to places she'd only dreamed of. Elle wrote of sailing on the Mediterranean at sunset, of ancient buildings in Rome, of poetry that made her heart ache with its beauty. "Sometimes I wonder if fate will ever allow us to meet," he wrote. "I carry your words with me everywhere, reading them beneath the same stars you see from your window." Emmeline clutched the letter to her chest. In her mind, Elle was tall and handsome, with grey eyes and refined manners. A gentleman who understood her longing for something more than the future laid out for her. "Emmeline, come downstairs at once." Her father's booming voice shattered her daydream. "The Hendersons are here for tea." With a sigh, she carefully folded the letter and slipped it under her pillow where she kept all his correspondence. Tonight, when the house was quiet, she would read it again and pen her reply. Outside in the stables, Malachi Peterson worked silently, brushing down Emmeline's favorite mare. At 26, he'd been working on the Ward estate since he was 16. His strong hands moved rhythmically through the horse's mane, while his mind formed sentences he would never speak aloud. Unlike the other stable hands, Malachi rarely joined in their rough banter. He kept to himself, earning him the nickname the Ghost among the staff. What none of them knew was that Bay, in his quiet exterior, lay a mind hungry for knowledge and a heart full of unspoken words. "Talking to the horses again, Peterson?" James, the head stableman, called out as he passed by. "Sometimes I think you prefer them to people." Malachi nodded slightly. "They listen better," he said simply. James laughed and continued on his way, never suspecting that the quiet stable hand who could barely afford proper boots had taught himself to read from discarded books and newspapers, or that every night, by the light of a single candle, he wrote words that made the daughter of the house dream of distant places. It had been an impulse that first day, seeing Emmeline slip the note into the merchant's bag. Malachi had retrieved it later, curious about what the beautiful, untouchable Miss Ward would write to a stranger. Her words had surprised him, revealing a soul as restless as his own. He'd written back on a whim and never expecting it to continue. He'd asked the merchant who owed him a favor for nursing his sick horse back to health to deliver his reply as if it had come from abroad. What had started as curiosity had grown into something else entirely. Something dangerous. From his position in the stable, Malachi could see Emmeline in the garden now, entertaining guests with her father. She wore a pale blue dress that matched the spring sky, and her laugh floated across the lawn. She had no idea that the man who wrote to her about European cities he'd only read about in borrowed books was the same man who saddled her horse every morning. The same man who had watched her grow from a gangly teenager into the woman who now haunted his thoughts. "Peterson," James called again, "stop daydreaming and get the carriage ready. Mr. Ward wants it prepared for tomorrow's trip to town." Malachi turned away from the view of the garden. "Yes, sir," he replied, tucking away his thoughts along with the beginnings of a new letter forming in his mind. That evening, while the Ward family dined on roast duck and imported wine, Emmeline could barely focus on the conversation around her. Her mind was still wrapped in Elle's words, imagining what it would be like to meet him in person. "Emmeline, are you listening?" her father asked sharply. She looked up from her barely touched plate. "I'm sorry." "Sorry, father. What were you saying?" George Ward frowned, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "I said that Frederick Henderson has expressed interest in calling on you. His father and I think it would be a suitable match." Emmeline felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Frederick Henderson was 35, pompous, and had the personality of cold porridge. But his family owned the largest textile mill in the county. "Father, I hardly know Mr. Henderson," she protested weakly. "That's what courtship is for, my dear," her father replied, his tone making it clear the matter was already decided. "He'll be joining us for dinner tomorrow night." Emmeline nodded silently, knowing argument was useless. Later, in the privacy of her room, she pulled out fresh paper and began writing to Elle, pouring out her frustrations and fears. "They wish to marry me off like a prized mare," she wrote, tears blurring the ink. "But how can I give my heart to a man I don't love when it already belongs to your words?" In his small room above the stables, Malachi sat at a crude wooden desk, a single candle illuminating his work. From memory, he copied passages from a book of poetry he'd borrowed from the village schoolteacher, one of the few people who knew of his self-education. He had just finished when he heard a soft tap at his door. Quickly hiding his writing materials, he opened it to find Martha, the housekeeper, standing there with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "I brought you some leftovers," she said kindly. Though she treated all the staff well, she had a soft spot for the quiet, stable hand. "You're too thin, boy." "Thank you, Mom," Malachi said, accepting the food gratefully. Martha glanced past him to the books stacked neatly on his shelf. "Still reading, I see. You know, Miss Emmeline loves books too. She's always got her nose in one when the master isn't looking." Malachi's expression remained neutral, though his heart quickened at the mention of Emmeline. "Is that so?" Martha nodded. "Speaking of Miss Emmeline, she seemed upset at dinner tonight. The master's arranging for her to meet Frederick Henderson, you know, from the mill." Something cold settled in Malachi's stomach. He'd seen Henderson on his visits to the estate, a man who spoke to servants as if they were a furniture, and looked at women like they were possessions to be acquired. That's good news for Miss Ward," he managed to say. Martha snorted. "Good news for her father's business, maybe. That girl needs someone who understands her spirit, not some stuffed shirt who'll clip her wings." She patted Malachi's arm. "Well, good night, dear. Enjoy the food." After she left, Malachi sat motionless for a long time. Finally, he pulled out fresh paper and began to write again. But not poetry this time. Tonight, he wrote from his heart, about stars over an ocean he'd never seen and love that had to stay hidden to survive. The next evening, Emmeline sat stiffly at the dining table, enduring Frederick Henderson's attempts at conversation. He spoke endlessly about himself, his business success, his new carriage, his opinions on everything from politics to the proper way to serve tea. "Don't you agree, Miss Ward?" he asked, after a particularly long monologue about the inferiority of imported silk compared to his mill's products. "I'm afraid I don't know enough about textiles to have an informed opinion, Mr. Henderson," she replied politely. Frederick smiled condescendingly. "Of course not. Ladies needn't trouble themselves with business matters. That's what husbands are for." Across the table, her father beamed approvingly. Emmeline took a sip of wine to hide her dismay. Later, as Frederick prepared to leave, he took her hand and pressed his lips to it longer than propriety allowed. "I look forward to our next meeting, Miss Ward." Once he was gone, George Ward turned to his daughter with satisfaction. "Well, he's quite the catch, isn't he?" Emmeline couldn't bring herself to lie. "Father, I don't think we would suit." Her father's face darkened. "Nonsense. You hardly know the man. And it's time you settled down, Emmeline. You're 22 already, practically on the shelf." "But father—" "No buts," he interrupted. "Frederick will be calling again next week. I expect you to be more receptive." He softened slightly, patting her shoulder. "It's for your own good, my dear. A woman needs security, and Frederick can provide that." Alone in her room later, Emmeline pulled Elle's letters from beneath her pillow and read them again by candlelight. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she wondered if she would ever find someone who saw her as Elle did, not as a suitable match or a business arrangement, but as a soul with dreams and thoughts worth knowing. The next morning dawned grey and threatening rain. Emmeline woke early, determined to go riding and clear her head. She dressed in her riding habit and made her way to the stables before breakfast. The stable was quiet in the early hour. She expected to find James, but instead discover Ed Malachi preparing her mare. "Good morning, Miss Ward," he said softly, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. "Good morning," she replied, noticing for the first time how his voice had a pleasant, deep timbre. She realized she'd rarely heard him speak more than a few words at a time. "Will you be wanting a groom to accompany you?" he asked, tightening the saddle. "No, thank you. I need some time alone." He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "There's Ra incoming. Don't stay out too long." The concern in his voice surprised her. "I won't." As he helped her mount, their hands touched briefly. Emmeline felt an odd sensation, like recognition, though she couldn't understand why. She'd seen this man nearly every day for years, but had never really looked at him. "Thank you," she said, gathering the reins. Finally he glanced up, and for a moment their eyes met. His were dark brown, intelligent, and somehow familiar in a way she couldn't place. "Be safe, Miss Ward," he said, stepping back. Emmeline rode off, puzzled by the brief exchange. Something about the stable hand nagged at her mind, but the freedom of the gallop soon pushed all other thoughts away. Malachi watched her ride off, his heart pounding. He'd nearly slipped up looking directly at her that way, but he'd needed to see her eyes, to know if there was any chance she might someday see him as more than just a servant. What he'd seen was confusion and no recognition at all. To her, he was just one of many who worked on her father's estate, invisible, except when needed. He turned back to his duties, mentally composing another letter. He would write about courage tonight, the courage to dream of impossible things, the courage to love without hope of return. In the merchant's next visit, he would have another letter to send, keeping alive the illusion of Elle, the European gentleman, who understood Emmeline Ward better than anyone in her real life ever could. True to Malachi's prediction, the rain came. Emmeline returned to the house soaked and chilled, earning a scolding from Martha. "You'll catch your death, Miss Emmeline. Whatever were you thinking, staying out in such weather?" "I needed to think, Martha," she said, allowing the older woman to help her out of her wet clothes. "About Mr. Henderson?" Martha scared, wringing out Emmeline's dripping hair with a towel. Emmeline sighed. "About everything. Father is determined I should marry, but your heart's not in it," Martha finished gently. She'd been with the family since before Emmeline was born, and often took liberties other servants wouldn't dare. "No," Emmeline admitted. "It's not." Martha patted her shoulder. "The heart wants what it wants, dear. I remember when I was young there was a boy from Temi village. Well, that's ancient history now," she smiled wistfully. "But I never forgot him." "What happened?" Emmeline asked, curious about this glimpse into Martha's past. "Life happened. He went off to find work in the city, and I stayed to care for my ailing mother. By the time she passed, he'd married someone else." Martha shook her head. "But enough of old stories. Get into these dry clothes before you fall ill." As Martha bustled about the room, Emmeline thought about choices and chances, about roads not taken. She thought about Elle and wondered what would happen if they ever met. Would the reality match the dream she'd built around his letters? That night she wrote back to him, asking directly for the first time, "Will we ever meet, or are we destined to know each other only through ink and paper?" A week passed, and then another. Frederick Henderson called twice more, each visit more painful than the last. Her father grew increasingly impatient with her reluctance. "He's going to propose at the summer ball," George Ward announced one evening, "and you will accept." Emmeline felt trapped, the walls of her comfortable life closing in around her. To make matters worse, there had been no letter from Elle for 2 weeks now, the longest they'd gone without communication. Had something happened to him? Had he tired of their correspondence? The uncertainty at her, making her distracted and irritable. On the 15th day without word, Emmeline decided she couldn't wait any longer. The travelling merchant who carried their letters was due to visit the estate that day. Perhaps he had news. When she saw his wagon approaching, she hurried out, not caring what the servants might think of her eagerness. "Mr. Finch," she called, approaching the merchant as he began unloading his wares. "I was wondering, has there been any mail for me?" The merchant looked confused. "Mail, Miss Ward? I haven't carried any letters for you in months." Emmeline felt as though she'd been doused with cold water. "Months? But I've been receiving letters regularly until 2 weeks ago." Mr. Finch shook his head. "Not through me, miss. Not since that first one last year." But who's been delivering them?" she asked, bewildered. "I couldn't say, Miss Ward," he replied, looking uncomfy. "Audible. Perhaps you should ask your father's staff." Emmeline thanked him absently and walked away, her mind racing. If the merchant hadn't been carrying the letters, then who had? And more importantly, who was Elle? The question haunted her as she wandered toward the stables, seeking the comfort of her mare. The stable was empty except for the horses, and Malachi, who was writing something at a small desk in the corner. He startled when she entered, quickly covering his work with his arm. "Miss Ward," he said, standing quickly, "I didn't hear you come in." Emmeline barely registered his discomfort, still lost in her own thoughts. "I'm sorry to disturb you, I just wanted to see Willow." "Of course," he said, moving toward the mare's stall. As he did, a gust of wind from the open stable door blew across his desk, sending a piece of paper fluttering to the ground. Emmeline automatically bent to retrieve it, her eyes catching a glimpse of the writing before Malachi could take it from her. The handwriting was achingly familiar. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. "It's you," she whispered. "You're Elle." "It's you," Emmeline whispered again, her voice trembling. "All this time it was you." Malachi stood frozen, the paper clutched tightly in his hand. The secret he'd kept for nearly a year lay exposed between them like a raw wound. "Miss Ward, I can explain," he began, his normally quiet voice strained. "Explain?" Emmeline's shock was quickly turning to anger. "Explain how you've been pretending to be someone else? Making a fool of me? No, that's not—" "I trusted you," she cried, forgetting that she was speaking to a servant, forgetting everything except the betrayal that cut through her. "I shared my deepest thoughts with you, thinking you were—" She stopped, unable to continue. Malachi took a step toward her, then stopped when she backed away. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "That first letter, it was impulsive. I never thought you'd write back." "But I did," she said bitterly. "And instead of telling me the truth, you kept pretending. For a year." "I couldn't tell you," he said softly. Who would believe that a stable hand could write those letters, that he could feel those things? Emmeline stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not just the rough clothes and calloused hands, but the intelligence in his eyes, the sensitivity in his expression. "So everything was a lie?" she asked, her voice small. "The travels, the experiences, all of it?" Malachi swallowed hard. "I've never left this county, never seen the ocean or walked through Rome." He looked directly at her then, a courage born of desperation. "But everything I wrote about how I felt, about beauty, about life, about you, that was all true. You, that." Emmeline felt dizzy with confusion. The man she'd imagined, the cultured European gentleman she'd fallen in love with through his letters, didn't exist. In his place stood Malachi Peterson, A man who had deceived her, yes, but also a man who had somehow seen into her soul. "I can't," she began, then shook her head. "I can't talk about this now." She turned and fled the stable, nearly colliding with James, who was just entering. "Miss Ward?" the head stableman called after her in concern, but she didn't stop. James turned to Malachi with suspicion. "What did you do to upset Miss Ward?" "Nothing, sir," Malachi answered, tucking the paper into his pocket. "She was asking about her mare and became upset." James looked unconvinced but let the matter drop. "Get back to work, Peterson, and remember your place." Those last words echoed in Malachi's mind for the rest of the day. Remember your place, as if he could ever forget it. Emmeline spent the afternoon locked in her room, rereading every letter Elle had sent her. Now that she knew the truth, she could see hints of Malachi in them. References to the estate, observations about her daily routine that no stranger could have known. Yet the words still moved her. The thoughts were still beautiful, the sentiment still sincere. How could a stable hand write like this? Where had he learned such things? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Emmeline." It was her father. "Are you unwell? You missed lunch." "I have a headache, father," she called back, hastily hiding the letters. "I'll be down for dinner." "See that you are," he replied. "The Hendersons are joining us again." Emmeline groaned inwardly. Frederick Henderson was the last person she wanted to see tonight. How could she make polite conversation when her world had just been turned upside down? Yet she had no choice. At dinner, she smiled mechanically at Frederick's jokes and responded appropriately to his questions, all while her mind kept returning to the stable and to Malachi. "You seem distracted tonight, Miss Ward," Frederick observed during dessert. "I apologize, Mr. Henderson. I have a slight headache." Frederick smiled with what he clearly thought was gallantry. "Perhaps you need more fresh air. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me on a drive tomorrow afternoon?" Before Emmeline could formulate an excuse, her father jumped in. "She'd be delighted, wouldn't you, my dear?" Trapped, Emmeline nodded. "Of course." Later, after the Hendersons had left, George Ward called his daughter into his study. "Frederick is going to propose soon," he said without preamble. "He mentioned something about ordering a ring from Boston." Emmeline's heart sank. "Father, please, I don't love him." George Ward sighed impatiently. "Love. You've been reading too many novels, Emmeline. Marriage isn't about love, it's about security, family connections, building a future. Frederick can give you all of that." "But what about happiness?" she asked desperately. "Happiness comes from knowing your duty and fulfilling it," her father replied firmly. "Your mother understood that." The mention of her mother silenced Emmeline. Eleanor Ward had been a dutiful wife until her death 10 years ago, but Emmeline had few memories of her mother smiling. "The summer ball is in 3 weeks," her father continued. "I expect you to accept Frederick's proposal that night." Emmeline left her father's study feeling as though she were walking to her own execution. 3 weeks, 3 weeks, until her future was sealed. The next morning, Emmeline rose early again. She hadn't slept well, her dreams filled with letters that turned to ashes and voices that called from far away. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. This time, she found Malachi alone in the tack room, polishing a saddle. He looked up when she entered, his expression guarded. "Miss Ward," he said, starting to rise. "Stay seated," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "I have questions and I want honest answers." Malachi nodded, setting aside his work. "I've never written you anything but the truth, except for who I was." Emmeline took a deep breath. "How did you learn to write like that? To quote poetry and describe places you've never seen?" "Books," he answered simply. "I taught myself to read when I was 12, using discarded newspapers and pamphlets. Later, the school teacher in the village let me borrow books. I read everything I could find, poetry, novels, travel journals. And no one knew? All these years?" "A few people, Martha knows. The school teacher. James suspects but doesn't care as long as I do my work." Emmeline shook her head in wonder. "Why did you answer my first letter?" Malachi looked down at his hands. "I saw you put it in the merchant's bag. I was curious. And then, when I read it..." He hesitated. Your words were like hearing my own thoughts, spoken aloud. I had to respond. But why keep pretending to be someone else? Would you have continued writing if you'd known it was me? He asked, looking up at her. The directness of his gaze unsettled her. I don't know. I do, he said quietly. You wouldn't have, and I couldn't bear for the letters to stop. The honesty in his voice struck her. He was right, of course. If she'd known from the beginning that her correspondent was a stable hand, she would never have written back. What happens now? She asked. That's up to you, Malachi replied. If you want me to leave the estate, I will. No, she said quickly, surprising herself. No, I don't want that. They looked at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. Emmeline moved away from Malachi just as the door opened, and Jay Ames entered. Miss Ward, he said, surprised. Can I help you with something? No, thank you, James, she replied smoothly. I was just asking Peterson about exercising Willow today. I'm afraid I won't be able to ride. I have a prior engagement. James nodded, though his eyes moved suspiciously between them. As you wish, miss. Emmeline left quickly, her heart pounding. She had no answers, only more questions, but one thing was certain, she wasn't ready to. Oh, say goodbye to the man who had written those letters, whoever he might be. The afternoon drive with Frederick Henderson was torture. His new carriage was certainly impressive, with gleaming woodwork and plush velvet seats, but his company was as tedious as ever. My mill produced the fabric for these seats, he boasted, patting the velvet. Special order from London. Nothing but the best for my future wife. Emmeline stiffened at his presumption, but managed a polite smile. It's very fine work. Only the beginning, my dear, Frederick continued, oblivious to her discomfort. Wait until you see the house I'm building. 10 bedrooms, a ballroom, servants' quarters for a staff of 20. It sounds overwhelming, Emmeline said truthfully. Frederick laughed. You'll get used to it. A man in my position needs to make a statement, and his wife must be part of that statement. His words made her skin crawl. Not his wife must be happy or his wife must be loved, but his wife must be part of that statement. Like the velvet seats or the fancy carriage, just another possession to display his wealth and status. When they returned to the Ward estate, Frederick helped her down from the carriage, holding her hand longer than necessary. Until the ball, Miss Ward, he said, his eyes travelling possessively over her face. I have a very important question to ask you that night. Emmeline nodded mutely, withdrawing her hand as quickly as politeness allowed. As she watched his carriage pull away, she felt a presence behind her and turned to find Malachi standing a respectful distance away, holding a letter. This came for you, Miss Ward, he said formally for the benefit of anyone watching. The merchant delivered it earlier. Their fingers brushed as she took the envelope, sending an unexpected shiver up her arm. Thank you, Peterson, she replied, equally formal. Only when she was alone in her room did she open the letter. It wasn't from abroad this time. The paper was simple, the same kind Malachi had been writing on in the stable. I never lied about the important things, it began. Every word I wrote about beauty, about longing, about the stars we both sleep under. Those were all true. If you never want to speak of this again, I'll understand. But please know that the man who wrote to you for a year wasn't a complete fiction. He lives in me, even if he doesn't have the advantages I pretended he had. The letter was signed simply Malachi this time, not L. Emmeline read it 3 times, then carefully added it to the stack beneath her pillow. She had a decision to make and not much time to make it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations for the summer ball. Dressmakers came and went, florists delivered D-samples, and the house was cleaned from top to bottom. Through it all, Emmeline moved like someone in a dream, her mind elsewhere. She saw Malachi daily, but always at a distance or in the presence of others. Their only communication was through his letters, which now came every other day, delivered discreetly by Martha, who Emmeline suspected had known the truth all along. These new letters were different, more direct, more personal. He wrote about his childhood in a poor mining town, about losing his parents to illness, about finding work at the Ward estate and discovering the library where the family rarely ventured. He wrote about seeing Emmeline grow up, always from a distance, always aware of the gulf between them. And he wrote about his dreams, of education, of travel, of a life where he was judged by his mind and heart rather than his position. Emmeline wrote back, leaving her letters where Martha Coe would find them. She told him about her own dreams, her fears about marriage to Frederick, her growing resentment of the life planned out for her. "Sometimes I think about running away," she confessed in one letter. "But where would I go? What skills do I have? I've been raised to be decorative, not useful." His reply came the next day. "You underestimate yourself. You have a keen mind and a brave heart. Those are worth more than any practical skill." His faith in her stirred something deep inside Emmeline, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. 5 days before the ball, Frederick visited again, bringing with him a small velvet box. "A preview," he said with a smug smile, opening it to reveal a diamond ring that must have cost a fortune. "Of course, I'll present it properly at the ball, with your father's blessing." Emmeline stared at the ring with horror. It was enormous, gaudy, a stone meant to show off wealth rather than symbolize love. "It's very impressive," she managed to say. Frederick beamed. "Only the best for my bride." That night, Emmeline wrote the most difficult letter of her life to Malachi. "I can't marry Frederick," she wrote, "but I don't see any way out. Father is determined and I have nowhere to go. If only we had met differently. If only the world were different." She didn't sleep, waiting anxiously for his reply. It came at dawn, delivered by Martha with her morning tea. "Meet me at the edge of the woods tonight at 8, he wrote. "I have something to show you." The day passed with excruciating slowness. Emmeline went through the motions of her usual routine, her mind fixed on the coming evening. At dinner, she barely touched her food, earning a concerned look from Martha. "Are you feeling well, Miss Emmeline?" the housekeeper asked as she helped her change afterward. "Just nervous about the ball," Emmeline lied. Martha's wise eyes saw through her. "And about Mr. Henderson's proposal?" Emmeline sighed. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows you well." Martha patted her hand. "Follow your heart, dear, it usually knows best." At 7:45, Emmeline slipped out of the house. She told her father she was tired and going to bed early, knowing he was busy with estate accounts and unlikely to check on her. The evening was warm, the sky still light as she made her way across the grounds toward the woods that marked the boundary of the estate. Her heart raced, partly from the risk of discovery, partly from the anticipation of seeing Malachi alone. He was waiting where he'd said he would be, sitting on a fallen log with a book in his lap. A small lantern burned beside him, unnecessary in the lingering twilight, but creating a circle of golden warmth. He stood when he saw her, his face showing a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "You came," he said simply. "I had to," she replied. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Without the barriers of class and role between them, Emmeline saw Malachi clearly, a handsome man with intelligent eyes and a gentle mouth, his body strong from physical labor, but his hands surprisingly elegant. "What did you want to show me?" she asked finally. He gestured to the log where he'd been sitting. "This is where I come to read, to think, to write to you. I've spent hundreds of evenings here, looking up at the stars and imagining you reading my words." Emmeline sat down, touched by the simplicity of his special place. "It's peaceful here." Malachi nodded, sitting beside her, but maintaining a respectful distance. "I come here to dream," he said. "And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Dreams." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a Folfi. "Dead letter. This came yesterday from a friend in Boston. He's found me a position there working for a printer who needs someone who can read proofs and help with typesetting." Emmeline felt a sudden hollow sensation in her chest. "You're leaving?" "I could be," he said. "Boston is a big city. A person could get lost there, start fresh, even a woman with no practical skills but a keen mind and brave heart." Her breath caught as she understood what he was suggesting. "You mean—" "Come with me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Not as my wife, I wouldn't presume that far. But as my friend, we could both start new lives away from here." But how would we live? Where would we stay? My friend has rooms above the print shop. He's offered to let me stay until I find my own place. As for money, he hesitated. I've been saving every penny for years. It's not much, but enough to get us to Boston and live modestly for a few months. Emmeline's mind raced. Leave everything behind, her home, her family, her privileged life, to follow a stable hand to a city she'd never seen. It was madness. And yet the alternative was Frederick Henderson, and a lifetime of empty luxury, her spirit slowly crushed under the weight of duty and expectation. "When would we go?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Hope flared in Malachi's eyes. "The night of the ball, everyone will be busy. We could slip away unnoticed and catch the midnight train from the next town." It could work, she thought. With all the commotion of the ball, she might not be missed until morning. By then, they could be miles away. "I need to think," she said. It's a huge decision." Malachi nodded, his expression serious. "I understand, but we don't have much time. The ball is in 3 days. 3 days to decide the course of her entire life. 3 days to choose between duty and freedom, security and uncertainty. Frederick Henderson and Malachi Peterson." As if reading her thoughts, Malachi gently took her hand. "I'm not offering you an easy life, Emmeline. I'm offering you a chance at a real one, where you make your own choices, follow your own heart." The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the clean scent of soapy and hay that clung to him. "Whatever you decide," he continued, "I want you to have this." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Open it later, when you're alone." Emmeline took it, feeling the weight of a book inside. "Thank you." The snap of a twig in the distance made them both freeze. Someone was coming through the woods. "You should go," Malachi whispered urgently. "Back to the house, quickly." Emmeline stood, clutching the package. "I'll let you know." I couldn't sleep," she stammered. "I thought a short walk might help." George Ward frowned. "Alone? After dark? That's not appropriate, Emmeline." "I'm sorry, Father. I didn't go far." His eyes fell to the package in her hands. "What's that?" Emmeline's mind raced. "A book. I borrowed it from the library earlier and forgot to bring it upstairs." He seemed to accept this explanation, his frown easing. "Well, get to bed now. We have final preparations for the ball tomorrow, and I need you well rested." The next morning, Emmeline woke to find Martha placing a breakfast tray beside her bed. "Your father says you're to rest today," the housekeeper explained. "Save your energy for the final preparations tomorrow and the ball the day after." Emmeline sat up, instantly alert. Did he seem suspicious about anything? Martha gave her a knowing look. "He mentioned you were wandering the grounds alone last night. I told him you've been having trouble sleeping lately, worrying about the ball and other matters." "Thank you, Martha." The older woman sat on the edge of the bed, lowering her voice. "Is there something I should know, Miss Emmeline? Something I might be able to help with?" For a moment, Emmeline was tempted to confide in Martha, who had been more of a mother to her than anyone, but the risk was too great. "I'm just nervous about the ball," she said, the same lie she'd told before. Martha patted her hand. "Everything will work out as it should, dear. Just remember what I said. Follow your heart." After Martha left, Emmeline spent the day in her room, alternating between reading Jane Eyre and staring out the window at the stables in the distance. Once she saw Malachi crossing the yard, his tall figure unmistakable even from afar. Could she really do this? Leave everything behind for an uncertain future with a man she barely knew in person, however well she knew his heart through his letters. But that was the crux of it, wasn't it? She did know his heart. The letters hadn't been a complete lie. They'd revealed his true self, hidden beneath the role society had assigned him. As evening approached, Emmeline made her decision. She wrote a short note to Malachi and rang for Martha, and to her bright future. Emmeline lifted her glass mechanically, the wine tasting like ashes in her mouth. This might be the last meal she ever shared with her father. Despite his controlling nature and traditional views, she knew he loved her in his way. "Are you excited about tomorrow?" he asked as they dined. "Yes, father," she lied, very excited. After dinner, he surprised her by taking her hands in his. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Seeing you set." The Ward estate buzzed with activity from dawn. Servants polishing silver, arranging flowers, and transforming the grand ballroom into a glittering wonderland of crystal and candlelight. Emmeline watched it all with a strange detachment, knowing she would be gone before the night ended. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, her thoughts focused on the journey ahead. "You look pale, dear," Martha commented, as she helped Emmeline dress for a late breakfast. "Are you feeling unwell?" "Just nervous about tonight," Emmeline replied, the excuse becoming all too familiar. Martha studied. "Nung the change in circumstances. We need to leave earlier," she wrote. "Meet me at 7 by the oak tree before the ball properly begins. Everyone will be busy with last-minute preparations." Martha took the note and tucked it into her pocket. "I'll deliver this right away. And Miss Emmeline," she hesitated, "be careful. Your father would not take kindly to this plan if he discovered it." After Martha left, Emmeline finished dressing, then began the diffay. "Miss Ward, you don't know what you're saying," James insisted. "Whatever nonsense this boy has put in your head." "It's not nonsense," she said firmly, "and he hasn't put anything in my head. I'm going with him because I want to." James looked between them again, his expression hardening. "I can't let you do this. I have to tell your father." He turned to go, but Malachi moved with surprising speed, grabbing his arm. "James, wait. You've known me for 10 years. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my character?" The older man hesitated. "No," he admitted reluctantly. "You've been a good worker, kept to yourself." "Then trust me now," Mal Aki pleaded. "I would never hurt her. I'm trying to help her avoid a life that would make her miserable." James snorted. "A life of wealth and privilege. Most people would kill for that." "A life without love," Emmeline corrected quietly. "Without choice. Please, James, I'm not asking you to approve, just to give us a head start." The stableman looked troubled, years of loyalty to the Ward family warring with the genuine distress he saw on Emmeline's face. Finally, he sighed heavily. "I didn't see anything," he said gruffly. "And I won't say anything for an hour. After that, I make no promises." Relief flooded through Emmeline. "Thank you," she breathed. James pointed a warning finger at Malachi. "You take care of her, Peterson. If I hear you've let any harm come to Miss Ward, I'll hunt you down myself." Malachi nodded solemnly. "I'll protect her with my life." With one last conflicted look, James turned and walked back toward the stables, shoulders hunched as if carrying a heavy burden. "We need to hurry," Malachi said, once James was out of sight. "He gave us an hour, but someone else might notice you're missing before then." They set off through the woods, Emmeline struggling to keep up in her impractical ball slippers. After a few minutes, she stopped with a frustrated groan. "These shoes are impossible," she complained, leaning against a tree to rub her already blistered heel. Without a word, Malachi knelt before her, placing her bags on the ground. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her feet. When she nodded, he gently removed her delicate slippers, then pulled off his own sturdy boots. "Try these," he said, offering them to her. "They'll be too big, but better than nothing." "But what will you wear?" He smiled. "I'm used to going barefoot in summer. It's no hardship." Emmeline slipped her feet into his boots, touched by the simple kindness. They were indeed far too large, but with her stockings stuffed into the toes, she could walk without them falling off. "Better?" he asked, standing and picking up their bags again. "Much," she replied, taking an experimental step. "Thank you." They continued on, moving as quickly as possible through the deepening twilight. The forest floor was soft with pine needles, making their passage almost silent. In the distance, Emmeline could hear the faint sounds of music and laughter from the ball that had begun without her. "What will Boston be like?" she asked as they walked, partly from curiosity, partly to distract herself from the growing awareness that she was leaving behind everything she'd ever known. "Busy, crowded, Full of opportunities, Malachi replied. My friend Thomas writes that there are libraries open to the public, lectures at the university that anyone can attend, newspapers that need writers. And what about me? Emmeline asked, suddenly uncertain. What will I do there? Malachi glanced at her. Whatever you want. That's the point, isn't it? You could teach music or drawing to children, work in a shop, write for those same newspapers. The possibilities were both thrilling and terrifying. Emmeline had never considered a life where she would need to support herself, to make her own way in the world. We'll figure it out together, Malachi assured her, seeming to sense her anxiety. One day at a time. As they neared the edge of the woods, the village came into view, a cluster of small houses and shops nestled in the valley below. Lights twinkled in windows, and the spire of the church rose above the other buildings, silvered by the rising moon. Almost there, Malachi said encouragingly. The wagon should be waiting by the blacksmith's shop. They had just emerged from the tree line when the sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. A rider was approaching rapidly from the direction of the estate. Quick, Malachi hissed, pulling Emmeline back into the shadows of the trees. Someone's coming. They crouched behind a large bush, hearts pounding as the rider came into view. It was one of her father's men, moving fast along the main road that led from the estate to the village. They've discovered I'm missing, Emmeline whispered, fear clutching at her throat. James must have told them after all. Malachi shook his head. I don't think so. He's not searching. He's riding straight to the village, probably carrying a message. They waited until the rider had passed, then cautiously continued, keeping to the side of the road where trees provided cover. The first houses of the village were just ahead when they heard more hoofbeats, several horses this time coming from behind them. Run! Malachi urged, grabbing Emmeline's hand. They're coming! They sprinted toward the village, Emmeline's skirts hiked up around her knees, Malachi's two large boots clumping awkwardly on her feet. The sound of horses grew louder, and a shout went up behind them. There they are! Stop them! Emmeline's lungs burned, her legs aching with the effort of running in the cumbersome gown and boots. Ahead, she could see the blacksmith's shop and Dee beside it, a small wagon with a single horse. Almost there, Malachi gasped, still clutching her hand. Don't stop! They were just yards from the wagon when a horse and rider cut them off, emerging from a side street. It was James, his face grim in the gathering darkness. I'm sorry, Miss Ward, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I tried to give you your hour, but your father discovered you were missing right away. He threatened to fire anyone who didn't help find you. Before either could respond, 3 more riders appeared behind them, her father's stablemen, all looking uncomfortable but determined. Peterson, one called. Don't make this worse than it already is. Mr. Ward just wants his daughter back. Malachi pulled Emmeline closer, his arm protectively around her shoulders. And what about what Miss Ward wants, he challenged. Has anyone bothered to ask her? That's not for us to decide, Jarmez replied, dismounting from his horse. Please, both of you, come back to the estate. Maybe Mr. Ward will understand if you explain. Emmeline stepped forward, drawing herself up with all the dignity she could muster despite her disheveled appearance. My father has never understood me, and he never will. Please let us pass. Let us. James looked genuinely sorrowful. I can't do that, Miss Ward. Mr. Ward's orders were clear. He's already sent men to the train station in case you got that far. The other men had dismounted now and were slowly surrounding them. Malachi's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, but there was none. I won't go back, Emmeline declared, clinging to Malachi's arm. I won't marry Frederick Henderson. I won't live the life my father has planned for me. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, my dear, came a new voice. George Ward himself rode into the circle, his evening clothes, immaculate, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him was Frederick Henderson, looking equally angry and, Emmeline noted with disgust, slightly smug. Her father dismounted smoothly and approached them, his eyes fixed on Malachi with murderous intensity. You, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, you dare to steal my daughter away in the night? After all these years of employment, this is how you repay my generosity? Father, please, Emmeline began. But George Ward silenced her with a raised hand. "Not another word, Emmeline. You've disgraced yourself enough tonight." He turned to his men. "Seize Peterson. He'll be handed over to the sheriff in the morning." Two stablemen moved to grab Malachi, who didn't resist. His eyes were on Emmeline, filled with a mixture of love and despair. "No!" Emmeline cried, trying to reach him as the men pulled him away. "Father, you can't do this. He's done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" George Ward repeated incredulously. "He's attempted to abduct my daughter." "He didn't abduct me," Emmeline insisted desperately. "I went willingly. This was my idea as much as his." Her father stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "You're confused, Emmeline. This servant has filled your head with nonsense. Once he's gone, you'll come to your senses." Frederick Henderson stepped forward, offering his arm to Emmeline with cold politeness. "Come, my dear. Let's get you back to the estate. You've had quite an ordeal." Emmeline recoiled from his touch. "Don't call me that. I'm not yours, and I never will be." Frederick's face hardened. "You're upset. Understandable after being manipulated by this person." He glanced dismissively at Malachi, who was being held firmly by the two stablemen. "But your father and I agree that the best remedy is to proceed as planned. The guests are waiting for our announcement." Emmeline looked at her father in disbelief. "You still expect me to accept his proposal? Tonight? After all this?" George Ward sighed heavily, as if dealing with a troublesome child. "The sooner this unpleasantness is behind us, the better. Frederick is willing to overlook this lapse in judgment." "How generous of him," Emmeline said bitterly. "And what about Malachi? What will happen to him?" "That is no longer your concern," her Ather replied coldly. "Now you will return to the estate with Frederick and me. You will change into fresh attire, and you will announce your engagement as planned. Tomorrow, when you've had time to reflect on your actions, we can discuss the consequences." Emmeline looked at Malachi, still held between the two men. His face was resigned but calm, his eyes never leaving hers. "I won't do it," she said, turning back to her father. "I won't marry Frederick. I won't pretend this didn't happen." George Ward's patience snapped. "You will do as you're told, Emmeline. This childish rebellion ends now. If you refuse to come willingly, we will bring you back by force if necessary." "George," Frederick interjected smoothly, "perhaps we should give Emmeline a moment to collect herself. This has been distressing for everyone." Her father nodded reluctantly. "Very well. 5 minutes, Emmeline. Then we return to the Baal." He and Frederick moved a short distance away, speaking in low voices. The stablemen remained holding Malachi, but they too stepped back slightly, giving Emmeline and Malachi a small measure of privacy. "I'm sorry," Malachi said softly, his voice breaking. "I've ruined everything." Emmeline moved closer to him, ignoring the watchful eyes of the men around them. "No, you haven't. You showed me what was possible, what freedom could feel like. And now you're more trapped than ever," he said bitterly. She shook her head. "They can force me to go back, but they can't force my heart to change." "I meant what I wrote in my last letter to you, Malachi." His eyes widened slightly, remembering the words she'd written. "If I was in love with a lie, then let me live in truth, with you." "Emmeline," he began, but she pressed a finger to his lips. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently. "This isn't over. They can separate us tonight, but they can't keep us apart forever. I'll find a way to help you, I promise." "Time's up," George Ward called, striding back toward them. "Say your goodbyes, Emmeline. You won't be seeing this man again." Emmeline stepped back, holding Malachi's gaze for one last moment. "Remember what you wrote to me," she said, "about courage." Then Frederick was at her side, firmly taking her arm and leading her toward the waiting horses. Her father, Moo, nented his own horse and gestured for one of the men to help Emmeline onto the extra mount they'd brought. As they prepared to leave, George Ward issued final instructions to James and the others. "Take Peterson to the storage room in the East Wing. Lock him in for the night. The sheriff will collect him in the morning." Emmeline watched helplessly as Malachi was led away in the opposite direction, his hands bound, his head held high despite his circumstance. In that moment, she made a silent vow. This would not be their end. Somehow, she would find a way to be with him again. The ride back to the estate passed in tense silence. Emmeline sat stiffly on her horse, refusing to acknowledge either her father or Frederick. Inside, her mind raced, formulating and discarding plans. She needed allies, information, time. When they reached the estate, Martha was waiting anxiously at the side entrance. Her face fell and she saw Emmeline's disheveled state and the grim expressions of the men escorting her. "Take her upstairs and help her change," George Ward instructed the housekeeper. "Something appropriate for an engagement announcement. And Martha," he added with a warning look, "no more assistance with clandestine messages. I know you were involved in this somehow." Martha curtsied meekly, but Emmeline didn't miss the flash of defiance in the older woman's eyes. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." As soon as they were alone in Emmeline's room, Martha embraced her tightly. "Oh, my dear girl, I was so worried when they discovered you missing. What happened?" Quickly, Emmeline explained the failed escape attempt and Malachi's capture. "They're holding him until morning, when the sheriff will come," she finished, fighting back tears. "And father still expects me to accept Frederick's proposal tonight." Martha's face hardened with determination. "Then, we have until morning to help him escape." Emmeline stared at her in surprise. "We? You're not the only one who cares about that boy," Martha said firmly. "And I told you, be braver than I was. I meant it." Hope flickered in Emmeline's chest. "But how? Father will be watching me closely now." "Leave that to me," Martha replied, moving to the wardrobe to select a fresh gown. "For now, you need to play along. Make your father believe you've accepted your fate." "I can't announce an engagement to Frederick," Emmeline protested. "I won't go that far." Martha thought for a moment. "Then stall. Tell your father you need more time, that tonight's events have left you too shaken to make such an important decision. He might grant you that much, especially with all the guests present." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Emmeline nodded reluctantly. "And Malachi?" "I'll find out exactly where they're keeping him and what the guard situation is," Martha promised. "Now let's get you changed and downstairs before your father comes looking for you." 30 minutes later, Emmeline descended the grand staircase in a fresh gown of pale green silk. Her hair had been hastily rearranged, her face washed clean of tears and dirt from their flight through the woods. To all appearances, she was once again the perfectly presented daughter of George Ward. Her father waited at the bottom of the stairs, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her. "You look lovely, my dear." "Thank you, father," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. He offered his arm. "The guests are waiting. Frederick is preparing a special toast for the announcement." Emmeline placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Father, I need to speak with you privately first." George Ward frowned. "There's no time for that now, Emmeline. We've already delayed the announcement because of your adventure. Please," she insisted, "just for a moment." With a sigh of impatience, he led her into a small sitting room off the main hall. "What is it?" he asked once the door was closed. Emmeline took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I understand that you're angry, and you have every right to be. I behaved impulsively tonight, and I'm sorry for the worry I caused you." Her father's expression relaxed slightly. "Well, at least you recognize that much. But I'm not ready to announce an engagement tonight," she continued firmly. "Not after everything that's happened. I need time to think, to be sure of my feelings." His frown returned. "This isn't open for discussion, Emmeline. Frederick has been more than understanding about tonight's embarrassment. The least you can do is proceed with the announcement as planned." "And IFI refuse?" she asked quietly. George Ward's face hardened. "Then Peterson will face more serious charges than attempted abduction. Theft, perhaps. I noticed your grandmother's pearls are missing from your jewelry box." Emmeline gasped. "You would send an innocent man to prison just to force my compliance?" "I would do whatever necessary to secure your future," her father replied coldly. "The choice is yours, Emmeline. Announce your engagement tonight, or your stable boy will face years in prison rather than a few months in the county jail." She stared at him, shocked by the ruthlessness of his threat. "I never thought you could be so cruel," she whispered. "It's not cruelty," he insisted. "It's protection. One day you will thank me for saving you from throwing your life away on a penniless nobody." Emmeline realized she had no choice, at least for now. She had to protect Malachi, even if it meant temporarily, giving in to her father's demands. "Very well," she said, her voice hollow. "I'll announce the engagement." George Ward smiled in satisfaction. "Excellent. Now, let's not keep our guests waiting any longer." As they returned to the ballroom, Emmeline's mind was already racing ahead. She would go through with the announcement tonight, but that didn't mean she had accepted defeat. Somehow, she would find a way to help Malachi escape before morning, and Père Apis, if fate was kind, to escape with him. The ballroom fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to Emmeline and her father. Frederick stepped forward, champagne glass in hand, his smile triumphant. "Ladies and gentlemen," George Ward announced, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "my daughter has an announcement to make." Emmeline stepped forward, feeling as though she were moving through a nightmare. She caught sight of Martha at the edge of the room, giving her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Henderson has done me the great honor of asking for my hand in marriage." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Frederick moved to stand beside her, taking her hand possessively. "And," Emmeline continued, choosing her words with extreme care, "I have asked for time to consider this most important of decisions. Mr. Henderson has graciously agreed to a proper courtship period before we formalize any engagement." Frederick's grip on her hand tightened painfully, his smile becoming fixed. This was not the announcement he had expected. "A wise decision," he said smoothly, covering his surprise. "After all, a lady should be absolutely certain before committing her future." George Ward's expression was thunderous, but with so many guests watching, he could hardly contradict his daughter's statement. Instead, he raised his glass. "To Emmeline and Frederick," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "may their courtship be brief and joyful." The guests echoed the toast, oblivious to the tension crackling between father, daughter, and suitor. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Frederick led Emmeline onto the dance floor, his fingers digging into her waist. "That was not what we agreed," he hissed, maintaining his public smile. "Your father assured me you would accept my proposal tonight." "My father doesn't control my heart, Mr. Henderson," Emmeline replied quietly. "Nor do you." Frederick's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps not yet, but I will, Emmeline, make no mistake about that." The threat in his voice sent a chill down her spine, but she kept her expression neutral as they moved through the steps of the dance. Over Frederick's shoulder, she saw Martha slip out of the ballroom, presumably to begin investigating Malachi's situation. The dance seemed to last forever. When it finally ended, Frederick escorted her back to her father, who immediately pulled her aside. "What was that?" George Ward demanded in a fierce whisper. "We had an agreement." "I didn't refuse him," Emmeline pointed out. "I simply asked for time. Surely even you can see the wisdom in that after tonight's events?" Her father studied her suspiciously. "This is another delay tactic. You're planning something." "I'm trying to salvage my reputation," she jaunted. A rushed engagement immediately after being caught attempting to run away would start gossip that neither you nor Mr. Henderson would appreciate. This argument seemed to give her father pause. "Perhaps," he conceded reluctantly, "but don't think this changes anything about Peterson. He'll still face the sheriff in the morning." "I understand," Emmeline said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "May I be excused now, father? I'm very tired after everything that's happened." George Ward glanced around the crowded ballroom. "One more dance with Frederick, then you may retire. And Emmeline," he added in a warning tone, "don't even think about leaving your room tonight. I've stationed men in the hallway." Emmeline's heart sank at this news, but she nodded obediently. One more dance, then she would return to her room and wait for Martha. Somehow they would find a way to help Malachi. The second dance with Frederick was even more unbearable than the first. His grip was possessive, his smile cold, as he bent to whisper in her ear. "Once we're married, there will be no more of this willful behavior," he told her. "A wife knows her place, Emmeline." After enduring Frederick's threatening words during their dance, Emmeline was finally allowed to retire to her room. As her father had warned, 2 men stood guard in the hallway outside her door. She nodded politely to them as she entered her bedroom, then closed the door and leaned against it, exhaustion washing over her. The events of the day seemed like a terrible dream. The failed escape attempt, her father's cruel ultimatum, the forced announcement at the ball. And somewhere in the east wing of the house, Malachi waited in a locked room for morning to come and seal his fate. Emmeline moved to her window, staring out at the moonlit grounds. The ball continued, beer low, music and laughter floating up through the summer air. How strange that everyone was celebrating while her world crumbled around her. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Martha, carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. "I thought you might need something to calm your nerves, Miss Emmeline," the housekeeper said loudly, for the benefit of the guards. Then, in a whisper as she entered the room, "I found him." Emmeline waited until the door was firmly closed before responding. "Where is he? Is he all right?" "They've got him in the old storage room at the end of the east wing," Martha replied, setting down the tray. "One guard outside the door. Thomas, the young stable boy. He's half asleep already." "And Malachi?" "Unhurt, but worried sick about you," Martha said. "I managed to speak with him briefly. Told him we were working on a plan." Emmeline sat on the edge of her bed, hope warring with despair. "But what plan, Martha? I'm trapped here with guards at my door, and even if we could free Malachi, where would we go? Father has men watching the train station." Martha's eyes gleamed with determination. "Not all trains stop at stations, my dear." "What do you mean?" "The midnight freight train passes through on the tracks behind the north pasture," Martha explained. "It slows down on the curve there, slow enough for someone to jump aboard." Emmeline stared at her. "You want us to jump onto a moving train?" "It's risky," Martha admitted, "but possible. Richard, the boy I told you about, he used to do it all the time when we were young. Said it was the best way to travel without paying for a ticket." The plan was dangerous, possibly even deadly if they mistimed their jump, but what choice did they have? "How do I get past the guards?" Emmeline asked. Martha smiled slyly. "I've put a little something in the coffee I brought them. Not enough to harm them, mind you, just enough to make them sleep soundly for a few hours." Emmeline shook her head in wonder. "Martha, you're remarkable. Your love makes people do remarkable things," the older woman replied simply. "Now you need to change into something practical. You can't be running and jumping trains in silk." While Emmeline changed into her plainest day dress and sturdiest shoe-s, Martha outlined the rest of the plan. She had already gathered supplies, food, water, a little money, and hidden them near the storage room where Malachi was being held. "The freight train passes at exactly midnight," Martha said. "You'll need to leave here by 11:30 to reach the north pasture in time. I'll create a distraction in the main hall to draw attention away from the east wing." "What kind of distraction?" Martha's eyes twinkled. "Let's just say the punch bowl at the ball is about to become much more exciting." By 11 o'clock, the guards outside Emmeline's door were slumped in their chairs, snoring softly. She crept past them, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would wake them, but they didn't stir. The corridor was empty, most of the household staff either attending to the ball or gone to bed. Emmeline moved silently toward the east wing, staying close to the walls where the floorboards were less likely to creak. Just as she reached the junction between the main house and the east wing, a commotion erupted from the direction of the ballroom. Raised voices, gasps, and the sound of breaking glass suggested that Martha's distraction had begun. Footsteps pounded along the main corridor as servants rushed to deal with whatever chaos Martha had created. Emmeline seized the opportunity, hurrying down the darkened hallway of the EC wing. At the far end, just as Martha had described, a single guard sat outside a heavy wooden door. It was young Thomas, barely 16, fighting to keep his eyes open at this late hour. As Emmeline approached, his eyes widened in surprise. "Miss Ward!" he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "You shouldn't be here." "I know, Thomas," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "But I need to speak with the prisoner." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "I can't allow that, miss. Mr. Ward's orders were very clear." Emmeline stepped closer, seeing the conflict in the boy's eyes. "Thomas, you've worked in our stables for 2 years now. Has Malachi ever been anything but kind to you?" The young stable hand shifted from foot to foot. "No, miss. He taught me everything I know about horses." "And do you really believe he deserves to go to jail, To have his life ruined because he and I care for each other? Thomas looked down at his feet. It's not my place to say, Miss Ward. Please, Thomas, she pleaded. Just 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. After a moment's hesitation, the boy sighed and nodded. 5 minutes, he agreed, pulling a key from his pocket. But if anyone comes, I'll have to say you forced your way past me. Thank you, Emmeline said fervently. You won't regret this. Thomas unlocked the door, then stepped aside. 5 minutes, he repeated. I'll knock when time's up. Emmeline slipped into the storage room, her eyes adjusting to the dim light from a single lantern. Malachi sat on a wooden crate, his head in his hands. He looked up at the sound of the door, his expression changing from resignation to disbelief when he saw her. Emmeline, he whispered, rising to his feet, what are you doing here? If your father finds out— There's no time for that, she interrupted, rushing to him. We're leaving, tonight. Quickly, she explained Martha's plan, the sleeping guards, the midnight freight train, the supplies waiting for them. Malachi listened intently, his expression shifting from doubt to cautious hope. It could work, he said when she finished. But what about Thomas? I don't think he'll raise the alarm right away, Emmeline replied. He doesn't want to see you in jail any more than I do. A soft knock at the door signaled that their 5 minutes were nearly up. Emmeline moved to answer it, expecting to see Thomas, but instead found Martha carrying a bundle. Change of plans, the housekeeper said urgently, slipping into the room and closing the door behind her. Your father is checking on you, Emmeline. When he finds your room empty, he'll sound the alarm. Emmeline's heart sank. Then we're too late. Not yet, Martha insisted, handing the bundle to Malachi. Thomas has agreed to help. He's going to tell them he saw you heading toward the West Gardens, which will buy you some time. Here, she added, turning to Emmeline. I brought this from the kitchen. She handed Emmeline a small knife. For the ropes, she explained, nodding toward Malachi's bound hands. While Emmeline carefully cut through Malachi's bindings, Martha kept watch at the door. The freight train still passes at midnight, she said, but you'll need to be extra careful now. Once your father realizes you're gone, he'll have men searching everywhere. Malachi flexed his freed wrists, then quickly changed into the clean shirt and trousers Martha had brought. What about you, Martha? He asked. You'll be in trouble for helping us. The housekeeper smiled sadly. I'm too old to worry about trouble. Besides, your father needs me too much to fire me, she added to Emmeline. I'm the only one who knows how he likes his tea. A commotion in the distance made them all freeze. They've discovered you're missing, Martha whispered. You need to go now. Emmeline hugged the older woman fiercely. I'll never forget what you've done for us. Be happy, Martha replied, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That's all the thanks I need. With a final squeeze of Martha's hand, Emmeline turned to Malachi. Ready? He nodded, taking her hand in his. Together. Martha checked the hallway, then waved them forward. Thomas has led them toward the west wing. Go east toward the kitchen gardens, then cut across to the north pasture. Stay in the shadows. They slipped out, moving swiftly down the darkened corridor. Behind them, they could hear shouting and the sound of running feet as the search intensified. The kitchen was empty, the staff all occupied with the ball or the growing commotion. They hurried through and out the back door, into the small garden where her bees and vegetables were grown for the household. Beyond the garden wall lay open ground, dangerous to cross, but necessary to reach the north pasture and the railroad tracks beyond. In the distance they could see lanterns bobbing as search parties spread out across the estate. We'll have to make a run for it, Malachi whispered, pointing to a dense stand of trees about 100 yards away. Once we reach those trees, we'll have cover all the way to the TRX. Emmeline nodded, gathering her courage. On 3, 1, 2, 3. They sprinted across the open ground, keeping low. The night air was cool against Emmeline's face, her heart pounding with exertion and fear. She'd never run like this in her life, had never experienced this strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. Halfway to the trees, a shout went up from their right. There, by the herb garden. Keep going, Malachi urged, gripping her hand tighter. Don't look back. They reached the trees just as the first of the pursuers emerged from the garden. The dense foliage swallowed them, branches scratching at their faces and clothes as they plunged deeper into the darkness. Malachi seemed to know exactly where he was going, guiding Emmeline unerringly through the trees. Behind them, they could hear men crashing through the underbrush, voices calling to each other as the search spread into the woods. "The pasture is just ahead," Malachi panted after several minutes of running. "We'll need to cross it to reach the tracks." They paused at the edge of the trees, catching their breath. The north pasture stretched before them, bathed in moonlight. Beyond it, they could just make out the gleam of metal rails. "What time is it?" Emmeline asked, suddenly afraid they might have missed the train. Malachi looked up at the position of the moon. "Not quite midnight. We still have time." But as they prepared to cross the pasture, a new sound reached them, the baying of hounds. "They've brought the dogs," Malachi said grimly. "We need to move faster." Hand in hand, they raced across the open pasture, no longer trying to hide. Speed was all that mattered now. The ground was uneven, and twice Emmeline nearly fell, saved only by Malachi's steady grip. The sound of the dogs grew louder, closer. As they reached the far side of the pasture, Emmeline risked a glance back. Lanterns bobbed at the edge of the woods they'd just left, and dark shapes, the hounds, streamed out onto the moonlit grass. "They're gaining on us," she gasped. "Almost there," Malachi encouraged her, helping her up the slight embankment where the railroad tracks ran. They stood on the tracks, breathing hard, looking back at their pursuers. The search party was halfway across the pasture now, the dogs leading the way, their howls cutting through the night air. "Where's the train?" Emmeline asked desperately. As if in answer, a distant whistle sounded, followed by the faint rumble of an approaching locomotive. "It's coming," Malachi said, relief flooding his voice. "But we need to move further up the tracks, to the curve where it slows down." They jogged along the tracks, each step bringing them closer to freedom and further from the life Emmeline had always known. Behind them, the pursuers had reached the embankment and were spreading out along the tracks. "There they are," someone shouted. "Stop, in the name of the law!" Emmeline recognized Frederick Henderson's voice and ran faster, fear giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. The rumble of the train grew louder, and suddenly its headlight appeared around a distant bend, illuminating the tracks ahead of them. "Here's the curve," Malachi said, slowing to a stop. "Remember, wait until the engine passes, then aim for one of the boxcars. The doors are usually open." The train approached, its massive form growing larger by the second. The noise was deafening, the roar of the engine, the screech of metal on metal, the hiss of steam. "When I say jump, we jump together," Malachi shouted over the noise. "Don't hesitate, and don't let go of my hand." Emmeline nodded, too terrified to speak. The locomotive thundered past them, so close she could feel the heat radiating from its metal sides. Then came coal cars, followed by the first of the boxcars. "Get ready," Malachi called, his eyes fixed on an approaching car with its door partially open. "Now!" They ran alongside the moving train, matching its speed for a few desperate steps. Then Malachi leaped, pulling Emmeline with him. For one heart-stopping moment, they were suspended in air, and then Malachi's free hand caught the edge of the boxcar door. With a strength born of desperation, he hauled himself up, still gripping Emmeline's hand. She scrambled against the side of the car, her feet finding purchase on a narrow ledge. Together, they tumbled inside the boxcar, landing hard on its wooden floor. For a moment they lay there, too shocked and breathless to move. Then Malachi crawled to the door and looked out. The search party was far behind now, their lanterns tiny pinpricks of light in the distance. "We did it," he said, turning back to Emmeline with wonder in his voice. "We actually did it." She sat up slowly, her body aching from the jump and fall, but her spirit soaring. "Where will this train take us?" "West at first," Malachi replied, moving to sit beside her. "But it'll pass through several junctions. We can switch trains, make our way to Boston eventually." "And then?" He took her hand, his touch gentle, despite the calluses earned from years of hard work. "And then we start over, together." For the first time since their escape began, Emmeline truly looked at him. This man who had written her such beautiful letters, who had risked everything for her, who had shown her what it meant to be brave. In the dim light of the boxcar, with the rhythmic clacking of the train beneath them, she saw not a stable hand or a servant, but simply Malachi. Intelligent, kind, determined Malachi. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly. "For what?" "For your letters. For seeing me. Really seeing me. When no one else did." Malachi smiled, the same smile she'd glimpsed that day in the stable when she'd discovered his secret. "I should be thanking you," he said, "for giving me something to dream about beyond the stables, for making me believe I could be more than what everyone told me I was." Emmeline leaned against him, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice heavy with fatigue. "Now we rest," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out the next step." As the train carried them further from the Ward estate and everything familiar, Emmeline felt a strange peace settle over her. There would be hardships ahead. She had no illusions about that. Life wouldn't be easy. Not for a young woman raised in privilege suddenly thrust into the working world. Not for a couple defying society's strict boundaries. But for the first time in her life, she was free to choose her own path. Free to love whom she wished. Free to discover who she truly was beyond the constraints of her father's expectations. "Malachi," she said, fighting to keep her eyes open, "will you write me more letters?" He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. She rested against his chest. "Every day if you want, though I can just tell you my thoughts now in person." "I'd like both," she murmured. "I want to keep your words beneath my pillow, wherever that pillow might be." "Then you shall have them," he promised, placing a gentle kiss on the top of her head. As she drifted towards sleep, lulled by the motion of the train and the warmth of Malachi's embrace, Emmeline thought of Martha and her long-ago love, Richard. She thought of the choice Martha hadn't made, the road not taken. "We'll write to Martha," she said suddenly, rousing herself. "Let her know we're safe." "Of course," Malachi agreed. "We owe her everything." "Not everything," Emmeline corrected, looking up at him. "We owe her for helping us escape, yes. But what we have, what we're building, that's ours alone." In response, Malachi lowered his head, and for the first time, kissed her properly. His lips were soft against hers, tentative at first, then more confident as she responded. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling. "I've been wanting to do that since I wrote my first letter to you," he admitted. Emmeline laughed, a free, joyous sound that echoed in the empty boxcar. "And I've been wanting someone to kiss me like that my entire life. I just didn't know it was you I was waiting for." 3 months later, Boston, Massachusetts, Emmeline ADJ ostered her simple bonnet as she hurried along the busy street. The city was so different from the quiet countryside she'd grown up in. Noisy, crowded, endlessly fascinating. She'd grown to love its energy, its possibilities, its anonymity. Here no one knew or cared that she was George Ward's daughter. Here she was simply Emmeline Peterson, wife to Malachi Peterson, the talented new proofreader at Harrison's print shop. They'd been married by a justice of Tehee peace 2 weeks after arriving in Boston. It had been a simple ceremony with only Malachi's friend Thomas, a different Thomas than the stable boy, and his wife as witnesses. No fancy gown, no elaborate celebration, just 2 people promising to love and support each other for the rest of their lives. Their accommodations were modest, 2 small rooms above a bakery, with a shared bathroom down the hall. Nothing like the spacious luxury of the Ward estate, but Emmeline had surprised herself by how quickly she'd adapted. She'd found work teaching piano to the children of middle-class families, using the one skill her privileged upbringing had given her that was actually marketable. The pay wasn't much, but combined with Malachi's wages, they managed comfortably enough. Reaching the print shop, Emmeline paused outside, watching through the window as Malachi bent over a proof, marking corrections with a pencil. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his movements precise and confident. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing her presence, and his face broke into a smile that still made her heart race. He met her at the door. "Right on time," he said, taking her hand. "Mr. Harrison has agreed to let me leave early today." "Wonderful," Emmeline replied. "We should have plenty of time before the lecture." They developed a routine of attending public lectures at the university whenever they could. Tonight's was on astronomy, one of Malachi's favorite subjects. His hunger for knowledge was insatiable, and Emmeline loved watching him absorb new information, his eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. As they walked hand in hand through the bustling streets, Emmeline marveled at how far they'd come in such a short time. The journey hadn't been easy. They'd spent that first night on the freight train, then 2 more days traveling before reaching Boston. Their money had been limited, their future uncertain, but they'd persevered, supporting each other through every challenge. Malachi had found work quickly, his self-taught literacy and natural intelligence impressing Mr. Harrison. Emmeline had taken longer to find her place, struggling at first with the practical aspects of running a household without servants, of navigating a city she didn't know. There had been tears, arguments, moments of doubt, but there had also been joy, discovery, and a deepening of the connection that had begun with those letters exchanged in secret. "A letter came today," Malachi said, as they turned onto a quieter side street. "From Martha." Emmeline squeezed his hand excitedly. "What news?" Their correspondence with Martha was infrequent but precious. She sent her letters through Malachi's friend Thomas, never writing their names on the envelope in case it was intercepted. "Your father has finally called off the search," Malachi reported. "Apparently Frederick Henderson is now courting a banker's daughter from the next county." Emmeline laughed. "That didn't take long, poor girl." "Martha says your father still mentions you sometimes, when he thinks no one is listening. She thinks he misses you beneath all the anger." A familiar pang of sadness touched Emmeline's heart. Despite everything, Esh-E did sometimes miss her father, or at least the father he might have been in a different world. One who valued her happiness above his own plans for her future. "Perhaps one day he'll understand," she said softly. "Not soon, but someday." Malachi nodded, knowing better than to offer false hope. George Ward was a proud, stubborn man. Reconciliation, if it ever came, would be years in the future. "Oh," he added, reaching into his pocket. There was something else in Martha's package. He handed Emmeline a small, carefully wrapped parcel. Inside was her mother's locket, the one she'd taken when they first attempted to escape, then lost in the confusion of their capture. "Martha found it in your room after you left," Malachi explained. "She kept it safe, waiting for the right time to send it." Tears filled Emmeline's eyes as she cradled the locket in her palm. It was her most treasured possession, a tangible link to the mother she barely remembered. "Help me put it on?" she asked, turning so Malachi could fasten the delicate chain around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin as he secured the clasp, sending a shiver down her spine. Even after 3 months of marriage, his touch still affected her powerfully. "There," he said, turning her to face him again. "Now you have a piece of your past to carry into our future." Emmeline touched the locket, then Rika, head up to caress his cheek. "Our future," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." Later that night, after the lecture on astronomy, they returned to their small rooms above the bakery. The space was modest but cozy, filled with books they'd gradually collected and simple furniture they'd purchased second-hand. On Emmeline's bedside table lay a stack of letters, not the old ones from their secret correspondence, which had been left behind in their flight, but new ones that Malachi still wrote to her several times a week. Sometimes he left them for her to find in unexpected places, tucked into her sheet music, between the pages of a book she was reading, under her pillow. Tonight, as they prepared for bed, Malachi handed her a freshly sealed envelope. "Another letter for your collection," he said with a smile. Emmeline took it eagerly. "Will you ever run out of things to write to me?" she asked, carefully breaking the seal. "Never," he replied, watching as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. "As long as I live, I'll have more to say to you than there are stars in the sky." The letter was shorter than usual, just a few lines in Malachi's now familiar handwriting. "My dearest Emmeline, today marks 3 months since we began our life together. In that time, I have learned something new about you each day. The way you hum while you cook, how you always turn to the end of a book first, the small furrow between your brows when you're concentrating. But the most important thing I've learned is this: true freedom isn't found in a place, but in a person. You are my freedom, my home, my heart, with all my love, Malachi." Emmeline looked up from the letter to find Malachi watching her, his eyes soft with emotion. "You still have a way with words," she said, carefully folding the letter and placing it with the others. "Owen Lee, because I have you to inspire them," he replied, drawing her into his arms. As they held each other in their small, simple home, so different from the grand estate where they'd first exchanged letters, Emmeline thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the risks, the fear, the uncertainty had been worth it for this. A life chosen freely, a love based on who they truly were rather than what society dictated they should be. Tonight, like every night since their escape, she would place Malachi's latest letter beneath her pillow. And tomorrow, like every morning since they'd found each other, she would wake to the knowledge that her dreams had become reality, that the man whose words had captured her heart was now hers, in truth and in love, for all the days to come. The end